to me right now. The challenge of focusing in a digital age. This is Alberta at Noon. I'm Josh Paget. Losing our ability to zone in when it's so easy to be distracted.
The average office worker now focuses on any one task for only 3 minutes. For every one child who was identified with serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children identified with this problem.
That's Johann Hari, the author of Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. He's our guest on today's program, and we're asking, what's lost for us all when we can't pay attention? Well, are you scrolling through Facebook right now? Maybe on Instagram? Perhaps you're enjoying a TikTok video while the radio's on in the background, making lunch at the same time as you're answering a few emails. It can be pretty hard to focus on just one thing nowadays. So our question for you today on the show is, what do you lose when you lose focus? What about your kids? Can you pull them away from their phones? What are they missing? I'm Josh Paget in for Judy Aldis today on Alberta at Noon. And if you'd like to join the conversation, the phone number to give us a call is 1-866-468-4422. That's 1-866-468-4422. You can also send us an email. It's alberta@noon@cbc.ca. And our guest today for the full hour is journalist and writer Johann Hari. His book, it's called Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And he is on Zoom. I can see him right now in London. So thanks for spending the hour with us. Hey there, Johann.
Oh, hey, Josh. Great to be with you. I would rather be in Calgary. I really like Calgary.
You know, it's a beautiful day here, +3 or whatever it is. It's nice. We'll take it.
Okay.
Stolen focus. Who or what stole it?
Well, this is what I wanted to figure out. I could just see that every year that passed, things that require deep focus that are so important to me, like having proper conversations, reading books, were getting more and more like kind of running up a down escalator. You know what I mean? They were just getting harder and harder. And I could see this particularly happening to the young people that I love. They were experiencing it even more harshly than me. And so I wanted to figure out, well, what happened to us? Well, where did our attention go? So I ended up going on this really big journey all over the world, from Moscow to Miami to Melbourne, and I interviewed over 200 of the leading experts on attention and focus. And what I learned really surprised me. There's scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better or can make your attention worse. And they range really widely. Some of them are in our tech, but some of them are things I'd never even thought about. The food we eat is really affecting our attention and focus. The way our kids' schools work is really affecting their attention and focus. Just a really broad range. But crucially, what I learned is loads of these factors that have been proven to make your attention worse have been hugely increasing in recent years. So anyone listening, if you're struggling to focus and pay attention, if your kids are struggling to focus and pay attention, it's not your fault. Your attention didn't collapse. Your attention has been stolen from you by these 12 big forces. But once you understand these forces, we can begin together to get our attention back. And
we'll probably get into thas we move along, but as its sort of root issue, what's wrong if we can't pay attention to one thing? What happens to us if we're unable to focus?
Well, I would say to anyone listening, just think about anything you've ever achieved in your life that you're proud of, whether it's starting a business, being a good parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever it is. That thing that you're proud of required a lot of sustained focus and attention. And the evidence shows when your ability to focus and pay attention breaks down, your ability to achieve your goals is diminished. Your ability to solve your problems is diminished. And, you know, there was a moment I really realized I had to investigate this. I've got a godson. And when he was 9, he developed this extremely cute obsession with Elvis Presley. And it was kind of adorable because he seemed to genuinely not know that impersonating Elvis had become a kind of cheesy cliche. I think he was the last person in the history of the world to do an entirely sincere version of Jailhouse Rock. And every night when I would tuck him into bed, he'd get me to tell him the story of Elvis's life over and over again. Obviously, I skipped over the bit where he died on the toilet. And one night I mentioned Graceland, where Elvis lived. And then people went to visit it, and his whole face lit up, and he said, "Wow, Johann, will you take me to Graceland one day?" And I said, "Sure," the way you do with 9-year-olds, knowing, next week it'll be Legoland or whatever. And he said to me, "No, do you really swear one day you will take me to Graceland?" And I said, "I absolutely promise." And I didn't think of that moment again for 10 years until so many things went wrong. He dropped out of school when he was 15. And by the time he was 19, he spent, this will sound like an exaggeration, it's not. He spent literally almost all his waking hours alternating between his iPad, his iPhone, his laptop. It's like his life was just this kind of blur of WhatsApp, YouTube, pornography. And it felt like he was almost whirring at the speed of Snapchat, where nothing still or serious could touch him. And one day we were sitting on my sofa here in London, and all day I was trying to get a conversation going with him, and I just couldn't. I literally couldn't. And he's a very intelligent person, but it's just nothing could get any traction. And to be totally honest with you, Josh, I wasn't that much better, right? I was staring at my own devices. And I suddenly remembered this moment all these years before. And I said to him, "Hey, let's go to Graceland." And he looked at me completely blankly. He didn't remember this thing that had happened. But I reminded him, I said, "Look, this is no way to live. Let's break this numbing routine. Let's go on a road trip all over the South." But I suddenly thought ahead. I said, "But you've got to promise me one thing, which is that when we go, you'll leave your phone in the hotel during the day, because there's no point going if you're just going to stare at your phone the whole time." And he took some time and he really thought about it, because he didn't like living like this. And he said, "Let's do it. Let's go." And I think it was literally 2-3 weeks later, we took off from London to, first we went to New Orleans. And a couple of weeks later, we got to the gates of Graceland. And this is even before COVID. There was no person to show you around. What happens is they hand you an iPad, you put in earbuds, and the iPad shows you around. So it says, go left, go right. Every room you go in, you hear a story about that room. And every room you go in, there's an image of that room on the iPad in front of you. So what happens is a slightly weird effect. Everyone seems to just walk around Graceland staring at the iPad, right? I'm getting a bit tense and irritable about it. And we got to the jungle room that was Elvis's favorite room in Graceland. It's full of loads of fake plants. And I'll never forget them. There was a Canadian couple, no offense to everyone listening, but they were Canadian. There was a Canadian couple next to us, maybe about 50. And the man turned to his wife, I'll never forget them, and he said, "Honey, this is amazing. Look, if you swipe left, you can see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right." And I looked at him and I was like, I thought he was kidding at first. And I watched him and his wife were just swiping back and forth. And I leaned forward and I said, "But hey, sir, there's an old-fashioned form of swiping you could do. It's called turning your head, because you realize we're in the jungle room. You don't have to look at it on the internet. It's literally right in front of you." And they looked at me like I was crazy and walked out the room. And I turned to my godson to laugh about it. And he was standing in the corner staring at Snapchat, because from the moment we landed, he literally couldn't stop. And I charged up to him and I did that thing that's never a good idea with teenagers. I tried to grab the phone out of his hand. And I said, "Look, I know you're afraid of missing out, but this is guaranteeing that you'll miss out. You're not present at the events of your own existence. You're not showing up at your own life." And he stormed off, understandably. And I walked around Memphis on my own that day. And I found him that night in the Heartbreak Hotel where we were staying up the street. And he was sitting with his feet in the giant kind of guitar-shaped swimming pool, looking at his phone. And I went up to him and I apologized for getting so angry. And he didn't look up, but he said, "I know something's really wrong, and I don't know what it is." And I think in the core of that story, you can see what goes wrong when you can't pay attention. When you see a young person who can't focus, and most people have young people in their life will be seeing this to some degree, it won't be as extreme in most cases. If you can't pay attention, you're going to really struggle in life to achieve what you want to achieve your goals and solve your problems. And that's why I thought, wow, that was the moment when I thought, okay, I need to write about this. I need to figure out what's going on here.
If that story resonates with you and you want to give us a call, we're talking about the difficulty just focusing today, being present. The phone number to call is 1-866-468-4422. That's 1-866-468-4422. You can also send us an email. It's alberta@noon@cbc.ca. Let us know if you're struggling to keep focus or those in your life are, and how that's impacting your life. Did things change at the end of this trip for you and your godson, Johann?
Yeah, they did in quite a moving way. And it was partly about learning some of those 12 factors that are so harming us and what they mean. So I'll give you an example of one that I think almost everyone listening, it'll be playing out to some degree for them. So I went to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to interview one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, an amazing man named Professor Earl Miller. And he said to me, look, there's one thing you need to understand about the human brain more than anything else. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. This is a fundamental limitation of the human brain. The human brain hasn't changed in 40,000 years. It's not going to change anytime soon. You can only think about one or two things at a time. But what's happened is we've fallen for a kind of huge delusion. The average teenager now believes they can follow 6 or 7 forms of media at the same time, and the rest of us aren't very far behind them. So what happens is scientists like Professor Miller, they get people into labs and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time. And they track them. And what they discover is always the same. You're not doing more than one thing at a time. What you do is you juggle very quickly between tasks. You're like, wait, Josh, what did you just ask me? What is this message on WhatsApp? What does it say on the TV just happened over there? What's this Facebook message? Wait, Josh, what were you asking me again? So we're constantly juggling. And it turns out that juggling comes with a really big cost, much bigger one than we realize. The technical term for it is the switch cost effect. When you try and do more than one thing at a time, you do all the things you're trying to do much less competently. You make more mistakes. You remember less of what you do. You're much less creative. This is why Professor Miller says we're living in a perfect storm of cognitive degradation as a result of being constantly interrupted. But with all of the 12 causes that I write about in Stolen Focus that are harming our attention, of which this is one, there are sort of 2 levels at which we need to tackle it. I think of them as defense and offense. There are loads of things that we can do to defend ourselves and our kids at personal level. So I'll give you an example of one. I'm pointing at it, but this is the radio, no one can see me. I've got here something called a K-safe. It's a plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, you turn the dial at the top, and it locks your phone away for anything between 5 minutes and a whole day. I won't sit down and watch a film with my partner unless we put our phones in the phone jail. I have my friends round for dinner, unless everyone agrees to put their phone in the phone prison. I use it 3 hours a day to get my writing done. So there are loads of things that we can do as individuals to protect ourselves. But the reason I talk about going on offense is I want to be really honest with people, because I don't think most books about attention are leveling with people. I am passionately in favor of these individual changes. They are really worth doing. They will really improve your life. On their own, they're not going to totally solve the problem, because at the moment, it's like someone is pouring itching powder over us all day, and then they're leaning forward and going, hey, buddy, you should learn to meditate. Then you would be scratching all the time. And you want to go, yeah, I'll learn to meditate. That's very valuable, but you need to stop pouring this itching powder over me. We need to also take on the forces that are doing this to us in ways I'm sure we're going to talk about more in this conversation.
It sounds like social media is a big one in many ways. And I know, a lot of folks will say, hey, hang on a second. I find a lot of joy in taking a break from work or whatever and watching a few TikTok videos. Is there a way to still use social media and multiple apps at a time that can, find some benefit for us?
Totally. So the way big tech want us to think about this debate is they want us to think are you pro-tech or are you anti-tech? And if you hear that, you think, well, I'm not going to throw away my laptop and my phone. I'm not going to join the Amish. No disrespect to any Amish listening. You are cheating if you are. You think, okay, well, I guess I must be pro-tech. That's not the debate. We're all pro-tech. And there are loads of great things about the technological world in which we now live. That's not the debate. The debate is what tech designed for what purposes. And to understand this, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley interviewing the people who designed key aspects of the world in which we now live. And one of the most striking things, Josh, was how guilty they feel about some of the things they've done. And these are people who passionately love technology, but they're guilty about some of the ways they designed it. So I'll give you an example. There's a guy called Dr. James Williams, a great person who used to work at the heart of Google, who one day he was speaking to a tech conference where the audience are literally the stuff that everyone listening, your kids are using today, the people who designed the stuff your kids are using today. And he said to them, if there's anyone here who wants to live in the world that we're creating, please put up your hand. And nobody put up their hand. And the reason is, and this was explained to me by lots of people, it took me a while to get it actually, because I thought it can't be this simple. Anyone listening, if you open TikTok, Facebook, Twitter now, please don't, for all the reasons we just said, but if you open them now, they begin to make money out of you in two ways. The first way is really obvious. You see advertising. Okay, we all know how that works. Mm-hmm. Second way is much more important. Everything you do on these apps is scanned and sorted by their artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out what makes you tick, right? So let's say that you've ever said you like, I don't know, Donald Trump, Bette Midler, and you told your mom you just bought some diapers. It's going to know, okay, if you like Donald Trump, you're probably conservative. If you like Bette Midler and you're a man, you're probably gay. No disrespect to any heterosexual men who like Bette Midler, I don't believe you. And you just bought some diapers, okay, you've got a baby, right? If you've been using these apps for any amount of time, they know tens of thousands of pieces of information about you. And they're learning that information primarily to figure out what will keep you scrolling, what makes you tick and what will keep you scrolling. For a very simple reason. Every time you open the app and start to scroll, or your kid opens the app and starts to scroll, they begin to make money because you see ads. And every time you close the app, that revenue stream disappears. So all of this genius in Silicon Valley, all of this AI, all of these algorithms, they're geared towards one thing and one thing only, which is figuring out how do we get you to open your phone as often as possible and scroll as long as possible. That's it, right? Just like the head of KFC, all he cares about is how often did you go to KFC this week and how big was the bucket you bought. All they care about is maximizing the amount of time you scroll. So these apps are designed to hack and invade your attention. But the most important thing to understand is they don't have to work that way. They can work in a very different way to heal our attention. I can talk more about that. But the important thing to understand is the technology we are currently using is working against us. I'm pro-tech. I want tech that works for us, not against us. And
we'll bring Ali into the conversation in Edmonton here. If you do want to join the conversation, we're talking about losing focus, the difficulties of keeping focus these days. We'd love to hear your stories and how you're finding your way through things. The phone number is 1-866-468-4422. That's 1-866-468-4422. Ali, good afternoon to you in Edmonton.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, thanks for calling us. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, it was obviously hard to focus pre-pandemic with all of our devices and everything. But I find even now it's almost like we have to rehabilitate ourselves and get away from our devices. Like, for example, if you go out to eat, a lot of restaurants are still using their QR code for their menus, right? So the intention is to sit down and have a conversation face-to-face, no devices with your family and friends. But the first thing you need to do is pull up your phone to look at the menu. And so it's just it's challenging.
No, you're so right, Ali. And there's an additional factor in COVID that I think has really scrambled our attention. You know, I remember at the start of the pandemic, my friends who weren't doing the heroic work of, nurses and so on, who were going to be stuck at home. I remember loads of people going, oh, we're going to be stuck at home. I'm going to finally learn French on Duolingo. I'm going to read War and Peace or something. And you will have noticed no one learned French, no one read Tolstoy, right? In fact, people Googling, how do I get my brain to work, went up by 3,000%. And there were lots of reasons, but I think one of them was, I learned about from an amazing woman called Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who was the Surgeon General of California until recently. And she said to me, imagine one day you're walking down the street and out of the blue, a bear attacks you and you survive, right? In the weeks and months that follow, you're going to find it harder to read a book because a big part of your brain is going to be just scanning the horizon going, whoa, something came out of the blue and attacked me. I've got to watch out for other things that might come out of the blue and attack me. But then Nadine said to me, imagine that you were then attacked by another bear. You're really unlucky in this scenario, but imagine it. And you also survive, right? After that, your brain would likely slip into a state called hypervigilance, which is where you just couldn't do something that requires deep focus, like a really deep work project or something, because your brain is just like, whoa, I do not understand what's going on now. This is dangerous. I need to be vigilant to risk all around me. Deep attention evolved for us to be able to provide it when we feel safe, right? And I think partly what COVID did, there's lots of things going on, but I think partly what COVID did to us, like the bear came back, right? The bear came back 2 times. We were just so scrambled. We were in danger. We were in danger from the virus. We were in danger from our whole lives being upended in these bizarre ways that none of us have experienced before. And I think a lot of us flipped into a state of vigilance. And I would say this with a lot of the causes that I write about in my book, Stolen Focus. You know, if you struggle to focus during a pandemic, do not blame yourself, right? I mean, it would be miraculous if you didn't. Almost everyone did. And this is true of a lot of these factors. We need to stop blaming ourselves and start understanding why it's happening to us. And for a lot of them, when we understand what's happening, we can actually begin to deal with them.
Thanks so much to Ali in Edmonton for that call. We've got about 3 minutes before a news break here, Johann. I want to bring up an email that we got from Gay. She talks about sort of that feeling of guilt. You brought it up with about your godson as well. And she writes, I'm 68 years old and I'm worried because I find it increasingly difficult to pay attention. I let myself spend hours watching TikToks and Reels. When my husband watches a shoot 'em up show, I pick up my phone to watch something besides the violence. I feel dreadful though when I spend too much time watching TikTok, and I've started to feel like I never get anything done. Some words of advice for Gay?
I would say go right online now, and I totally understand where you're coming from, Gay, and it is not your fault, right? As my friend Tristan Harris, who used to work at the heart of Silicon Valley, said, you can try having self-control, but every time you do, there are 10,000 engineers on the other side of the screen working very hard to undermine your self-control. So you are being hacked and manipulated. That is not your fault. You did not create these circumstances. So I would say a few things. Firstly, in terms of individual protection, I would say go straight online and order something called a K-Safe, the thing I was just talking about. Secondly, I would say download onto your phone an app called Freedom. Freedom can cut you off either from specific apps that you're addicted to. So in your case, it sounds like TikTok. You can just say to it, don't let me look at TikTok for the next 4 hours. And then once you push the button, there's nothing you can do to make TikTok work. Or you can get it to cut you off from the entire internet if you want to. And I think giving yourself that space will help your attention grow. But there's a bigger level to this that I'm sure we're going to come to later, Josh. We need to act together to to regulate these companies, because what's happening to you is happening to enormous numbers of people, right? People your age, people younger, people across the spectrum, particularly younger people. And we can stop them doing that. And I can tell you in very targeted ways how we can stop them doing that. And there'll be an event in your life, actually, that you'll remember, Gay, that I think is a good analogy for what we can do next. I'm conscious we've already got through, the clock's ticking down, so maybe we'll come to that in the next section.
Yeah, we've got about another minute left if you wanted to dig into that just a little bit, and we can pick it up after the break.
Gay, you'll remember the dominant form of gasoline in Canada and all over the world used to be leaded gasoline. And then it was discovered that exposure to lead is terrible for people's brains and particularly bad for kids' ability to focus. And if it's in the petrol, we were all breathing it in because of the gasoline fumes. So what happened? Group of ordinary moms in Canada, Britain, all over the world banded together and said, this is crazy. We need to ban leaded gasoline and move to a different form of gasoline. And these moms fought like hell for their children. They fought for years. And everyone listening knows they won. Mm-hmm. As a result, we don't have any more leaded gasoline. And the average Canadian child is 3 to 5 IQ points higher than they would have been had we not banned gasoline. Now, to me, that's a really inspiring model. That was ordinary people understanding there's something in the environment harming our attention. We've got to get rid of it and replace it with something equally good, something even better that doesn't harm our attention. I think we've got to do that with big tech, right? I'm pro-tech. I like social media, but we shouldn't have social media that is designed to hack and invade your attention, which is having such terrible effects on you, Gay, and on people all over Canada and all over the world. We can regulate them to have the equivalent of unleaded gasoline for our social media. I've spoken to people responsible at the heart of the machine who designed it. They say it's easy to do that. These companies won't do it themselves any more than the gasoline companies. We're going to go, you know what, guys? We've made enough money out of lead. Let's stop poisoning people. That's not how it works. They had to be made to do it in the same way we have to make them do it. But we are powerful. And the fact that almost everyone is experiencing something like what you're experiencing, Gay. In one sense, that's a strength because all the smoke alarms are going off now, right? Which means that we've got a very big constituency of basically everyone except Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk who are in favor of reform. And by the way, even Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk would be better off if we made these changes. They wouldn't be richer, but they'd be better off as human beings.
We'll pick this up right away. We've got Ruben waiting on the line. We're asking you to tell us your stories, how you're feeling about how you're focusing these days. The number to call if you want to join the queue is 1-866-468-4422. We'll look at some of the bigger picture, some of the societal work things Johann was bringing up there. But first, it is just after 12:30 here on Alberta at noon, and it's time for a news break from our newsroom with Tahira Firuzin. Hey, Tahira.
Hey, Josh. A government review has found there are no records of contact between staff in the Premier's office and Crown prosecutors. The review was launched after CBC News reported that someone in Premier Danielle Smith's office emailed Crown prosecutors about cases related to the Coutts border blockades and protests. The CBC reported that emails challenged prosecutors' assessment and direction on cases relating to the Coutts border blockades. In a statement today, the province says the Public Service Commission and government IT staff looked at nearly 1 million emails, including those that were deleted over 4 months. The opposition NDP is calling for an independent investigation. The government says the review won't be reopened unless there is new evidence. And Alberta's health minister says help is on the way for Albertans waiting for surgery. Jason Copping says AHS will contract 3,000 orthopedic surgeries per year at 2 private surgical facilities in Calgary. Copping says it will increase the total number of orthopedic surgeries done in Calgary by more than 20%. The additional surgeries will be performed at 2 Canadian Surgery Solutions locations in Calgary. Copping says there are also plans to build additional hospital operating rooms across the province. Turning to weather in Calgary today, clearing skies this afternoon, wind gusting to 50 at times, high of +4. Tomorrow, warm as well, a mix of sun and cloud, light wind, high +2. Edmonton today, mainly cloudy, slight chance we'll see some more flurries, wind gusting to 50 at times, high of 2 degrees. Tomorrow, a few clouds, that should clear up by the afternoon, windy, high of +3. Right now in Edmonton, -1, and in Calgary right now, mainly sunny and 3 degrees.
Hey, thanks so much, Tahira.
Thanks.
This is Alberta at noon. My name is Josh Paget, in for Judy Aldis here on the show. And we're talking about focusing and what happens to you when you lose focus. If you want to join the conversation, it's 1-866-468-4422, 1-866-468-4422. You can also email us, alberta@noon@cbc.ca. And our guest for the hour today is Johann Hari. He's the author of the book Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And Johann, before we go back to you, why don't we bring Ruben into the conversation right away in Leduc. Hey, Ruben.
Hey, Ruben.
Hey,
Yeah, go ahead.
How are
What's your experience right now? Looks like you've got 2 young ones at home.
I do, actually. I have 2. One is 14 and one is 11. And I'm just, before COVID, they're the best kids. They're in sports and they're active. They like to do all things with family and all stuff. After the COVID, somehow they're all glued to digital world. All they could think of is just the computer, TV, and the phone. And I'm so fed up. And I spoke to them multiple times. We watched TV, how to break that habit, and all this stuff. But it feels like nothing is working. And I get so mad. And my wife goes, okay, so the whole world is going. We cannot do anything. But I don't want to take my hands off of my kids. I really wanted to protect them. I really wanted to make sure that I lead the good path for them. But I feel really helpless. And but no matter what I do, and they get bored so quick. It's like if they don't get to stay on the phone, TV, or the computer, they're bored. And they don't like to help out on things. And, whenever we ask for helping other chores and all, and we have a big battle at home. So I'm so lost and I'm fed up. I don't know what to do. And when I was listening to your speaker, it's just like I am on that situation. I'm sure there are thousands. It has to be either government has to issue I heard in China or so, they had some some curfew for these kids that they cannot stay on a certain time of this. But I don't know if our government could do something like that. But at the same time, it's so necessary for society to come back to focus on their reality, not on only TikTok or YouTube videos.
Ruben, I hear your frustration. Johann, what do you make of Ruben's thoughts here?
I feel so moved by your call, Ruben. And, you should be proud of how much love there is in your question, right? That you love your children so much that you can't bear to see them like this. And this was, one of the reasons I wrote my book, Style and Focus, because I felt very similarly to you. I would say a few things that you can do. One of them is something that really surprised me. There's a lot of evidence that the food we're giving our kids is really negatively affecting their attention, and the food we're eating as adults is negatively affecting ours. I'd never even thought about this until I started interviewing these kind of scientists and experts on it. There's a few different ways. So say you have the standard kind of Canadian or British breakfast. You have kind of, toasted, toast with butter on it, or you have sugary cereal. What that does is it releases a huge amount of energy really quickly into your brain. It releases a chemical called glucose in your brain. And it feels great. You're like, whoa, yes, I'm ready. I'm awake for the day, right? Your kids will feel that. But a few hours later, you'll get to your desk, or your kids will get to their school desk, and they'll have a huge energy crash. And when your energy crashes, you get something called brain fog, where you can't really focus very well until you get another sugary, carby snack. And the way Dale Pinnock, who's one of the leading nutritionists in Europe, put it to me, is the diet we eat, the kind of standard Western diet, the diet of Canada, Britain, what it does is it puts us on a kind of roller coaster of energy spikes and energy crashes throughout the day. Whereas if you eat, say, oatmeal and blueberries for breakfast, that releases energy much more steadily. You don't have the same energy crash. There's another element of food that I found quite shocking, actually. So there was a big study. It turns out that the food we eat, the food that we're being sold, that we often give to our kids, often contains chemicals that act on them like drugs and cause attention problems. So, for example, there was a study here in Britain in a city called Southampton in 2009, where they got nearly 200 kids and they split them into two groups. And the first group was just given water to drink. And the second group was given water laced with the kind of synthetic dyes that you get in M&Ms, a lot of ready meals from the supermarket, all kind of food. And then they monitored the kids. The kids who drank the dyes were way more likely to become manic, to have attention problems, to be in the kind of state your kids were, where they needed constant stimulation. So shifting what your kids eat, I know it sounds really counterintuitive, I'd never thought of it, could play a big role. Another thing is I would really recommend looking up a group called letgrow.org. So one of the heroes of my book, Style and Focus, is an amazing woman called Lenore Skenazy. And she's, I think, really pioneered a solution for a big part of what's gone wrong with childhood. So when Lenore grew up in Chicago in the mid-'60s, and from when she was 6 years old, every morning she would leave the house on her own and walk to school. It was like 15 minutes away. And she would generally bump into all the other kids, because in the mid-'60s, all children walk to school on their own from what seems to us now an almost unbelievably young age, right? And then when school ended, she would kind of wander the neighborhood with her friends and without any adults watching over them, and then they went home when they were hungry, right? Again, you'll remember, this would have been, Ruben, this would have been your parents' life. It was my parents' life. By the time Lenore was a mom in the 90s, and I'm sure for you, that was over, right? You were expected to take your child to the school gates and then be waiting at the school gates when the day ended. In fact, by 2003, only 10% of Canadian or American kids ever played outside without an adult watching them. And it turns out, Lenore was uncomfortable with this, and she began to learn that this childhood we've lost contained loads of things that were really important for children to be able to focus and pay attention. So to give you a real obvious one, exercise. Running around boosts the amount of neurons children have. It boosts their attention. But one of the most important, and I'm really thinking about this as you're talking about your kids, is when children play freely with other children without adults standing over them going, no, Johnny, don't do that. Yes, Hannah, you can do that. Hannah, apologize to Johnny. What they do is kids take risks. they explore things, they figure out how things work, and they learn to deal with anxiety. So, you'll remember this. You climb a tree, you get a bit too high, you're really scared, but you find your way down, you didn't die. It's through facing these small challenges with other kids the whole time that you gain a sense that you are a competent person who can go out into the world and do something. We've taken that away from our children. So Lenore was really worried about this, but quite quickly, she thinks, okay, the solution here is obvious. I'll just let my kids go out and play. But quite quickly, she realized if you're the only parent doing it, you look nuts. The kids get scared. Often people call the cops. So she pioneered something that I think might be helpful, and I really recommend you champion at your kids' school. It's a program which she now runs called Let Grow. It's letgrow.org. What they do is they go to whole schools and whole communities, and they persuade everyone to give their kids increasing levels of independence that build up to them playing outside together with our adults. So I spent a lot of time with this program, and of all the conversations I had for the book, I think one of the most moving was with a 14-year-old boy in Long Island. This is just before COVID hit. And he was a big, tall, strapping 14-year-old boy. And until this program had begun 9 months before, he had never played outside his house without an adult, ever, right? And then this program started, and everyone started letting their kids go out, because if everyone knew everyone else was doing it, it was easier to do. And I said to this boy, what did you do? He said, we went to play in the park. We played ball games in the park. And then he leaned forward and he said it like it was telling me a terrible secret. He said, then we started to go and play in the woods, even though we don't have any cell phone reception in the woods. Right? And I said, all right. But as this boy was talking, it was like watching him come to life, right? And then he left, and Lenore was with me that day. And she turned to me and she said, think about human history. For all of human history, young people had to go out and explore. They had to map the territory. They had to figure out how things worked. And then in the space of 1.5 generations, we took all that away from them. For the first time in human history, we took it away from them. And that boy, given a tiny little bit of freedom, what did he do? He went into the woods and he built a fort, right? Because it's so deep in human nature. I think what we've done is the only place where our children get to explore anything is on Fortnite and World of Warcraft and on video games, right? We can hardly be surprised they become... So I would often say to parents, and I totally understand why parents are worried about letting their kids out. It's why it should be done through these structured programs. But what's the option for the kids if they're not staring at the screens and devices? If it's just staring at the wall, that's equally not a good solution. So I would really recommend look at their diet, get a K-Safe, and get your kids' schools to invite Let Grow so that they can start to play outside again. If they're playing outside with all the other kids, they're going to want to be there after a while.
There's a thread of simplicity that I think is worth pulling on a little bit here. You've mentioned sort of some of the simple things like getting out and exercising. Is it as simple in some ways as that, as just going back to the basics in a way?
It's not the only thing, but it's a big part of it, And one of the things I find so interesting, and I found really interesting looking at the science of all of this, is how did we get to the point where we neglected things that everyone listening, your grandmother would have thought were blindingly obvious, right? Think about sleep, right? So every human there's ever been knew they had to sleep. They needed a good night's sleep and knew they felt lousy if they didn't sleep, right? But we have massively cut back on the amount of sleep we get. In fact, people now sleep, on average, 20% less than they did a century ago in Canada and in Britain, right? And I've spent a lot of time interviewing experts about this. People like Dr. Charles Czeisler, who's the leading expert on sleep in the world, arguably. I interviewed him at Harvard Medical School. And he said to me, even if nothing else had changed except that we sleep so much less, that alone would be causing a huge attention crisis. In fact, children sleep 85 minutes less than a century ago. It's another thing I would talk to Ruben about getting your kids' eye guards, having really good sleep hygiene around them, because that will make a big difference. But it's fascinating to look at why sleep has this effect. If you stay awake for 19 hours, which doesn't sound like much to me, your attention suffers as much as if you got legally drunk. And one of the reasons why is the whole time you're awake, like now, if I haven't bored the listeners to sleep, the whole time you're awake, your brain is generating something called metabolic waste. It's what one scientist called it brain cell poop to me, which helped me to understand it. And the whole time you're awake, it's building up in your brain. And when you go to sleep, watery fluid washes through your brain and carries that brain cell poop out of your brain down into your kidneys and eventually out of your body. If you don't sleep 8 hours, that brain cell poop remains in your brain, clogging up your brain. It's why you suffer so much with your attention when you haven't slept properly. That feeling when you're really tired and you almost feel like you're clogged up. It's not a metaphor. You literally are clogged up. So you can see, to me, it's so fascinating. Again, it's quite a banal insight. You need to get a good night's sleep in order to be able to pay attention. No one's going to be sitting at home, dropping their cup of coffee about that. But we're in this weird mode where we know these things, but we don't do them. So a lot of my book is about trying to figure out, well, why don't we do them, right? Given that we know them, it's not rocket science. I mean, some of the things I write about are much more surprising, but, a lot of it is, stuff at some level we know. Why is that not happening? And it comes back to what we were talking to Gay about and others. It's partly that we're being forced to live in ways that are not compatible with our needs. I'll give you another example, one that I think most people will identify from their own lives. In 2018, in France, they were having a huge crisis of what they called le burnout, which I don't think I need to translate. And the French government, under pressure from labour unions, set up an inquiry to figure out, well, why is everyone so burned out all the time? And they discovered one of the key reasons was that 40% of French workers felt that the whole time they were awake, they could never really stop checking their email or phone calls because their boss could message them at any time of the day or night. And if they didn't answer, they'd be in trouble, right? This is a really recent change. I mean, when I was a kid, I don't remember my parents ever being contacted by their bosses after they came home, literally never. I mean, when I was a child, not that long ago, I'm 44, the only people who were on call were the Prime Minister and doctors. And even doctors weren't on call all the time, right? So we've gone from almost nobody being on call to almost, half the economy being permanently on call. And that means it has an obvious negative effect on your attention. You can't unwind. You've got to have a bit of your brain still on work the whole time. You're anxious right until the point when you go to sleep, which means you go to sleep later and your sleep will be worse. But what's interesting is France came up with a quite good solution to this. The French government, and stress again, they wouldn't have done it if labour unions hadn't pressured them, introduced a legal reform. It's very simple. It's called the right to disconnect. And it just says every French worker needs to have their work hours laid out clearly in writing in their contract. And when your work hours are over, unless they're paying you overtime, you don't have to check your phone, you don't have to look at your email. When I was in Paris time before last, Rentokil, the pest control company, was fined €70,000 for complaining that one of their workers hadn't checked his email an hour after he left work. Now, you can see how that's a big change. It comes back to what we were saying before about defense and offense, right? There are loads of things we can do as individuals to defend ourselves that I go through in Stolen Focus. And there are loads of things where we've got to go on the offense against these forces doing this. And that's something we can only do collectively. Maybe there's some people listening who could go to their boss now and go, you know what? I'm not checking my email after 5 p.m. from anymore, but I doubt there's many people like that. That's something we can only really do together, right? We can only do that as a big change together.
And we have seen some pushback on that here as well. Ontario, the details escape me, but Ontario has introduced a right to disconnect law as well. I want to bring Joan into the conversation in Edmonton. Joan, hello there.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, thanks for staying on hold there. Tell us what's happening in your life.
Well, first, I just have to say thank you so much to the author. I'm going to read that book. I think it's amazing. To me, it sounds as if he's yelling fire, okay?
It feels like it. Thanks, Joan.
No, we need to be alerted to fire because we're not realizing it. But I have to say this, when you asked earlier, I'll get to my son in a second, but remember when television was invented, I was I was older than that. But I'm thinking that television has been a problem also because when I don't want to feel something or deal with something, the TV comes on, or radio, I should say, too. But I think TV is a horrible thing that we are not. Anyway, now to the video game thing. What I told your other person is that when my son was young, video games came into their own. He's going to be 40 shortly. And so I was going to university, single parent, papers all the time, studying all the time, dinner to prepare, etc. I did not have time to have conversations with my son in any big way. So what he did is he played Donkey Kong or Super Mario or whatever those games were back then. And I guess I was for it because it seemed to be a good thing, but I can see now that it isn't. I think what he did during all that time, all those years, is that he subsumed his feelings in those video games. What I know now at present is that he has a family, 2 kids, small kids. He works all day online, apparently, from home. And then it, gets dinner and kids and all that. And then he goes to his favorite game. He said it's his favorite game, which is called Disco Elysium. And that if I'm interested, I could check it out. So, I can tell you I'm not in the least bit interested in video games at all. But I thought, well, I'll look at this Disco Elysium playthrough on YouTube, he said. So, it's not my thing whatsoever. But what I'm thinking, and your author as well, is that I think that my son subsumed his feelings into video games back then because there was no one to talk to, right? And I think that there's, in other words, I guess I'm asking, I don't know what to make of this. I don't think my son has access to feelings of any great importance. And I don't know how to go back to that time when I might have had those conversations with him, but that didn't happen either. So what does your author think of what I'm trying to say?
Joan, thank you so much for taking the time to call. That sort of finding that realness has been a challenge in some ways is what she's saying. What do you think, Johann?
Oh, Joan, God, I'm really moved by your question. And, I wrote a book before called Chasing the Scream about addiction. And one of the things I learned about all addictions is that the core of addiction is about not wanting to be present with your pain, right? So we try to avoid pain through an addictive behavior. That could be gambling, it could be alcohol, it could be heroin, whatever it might be. And it sounds like, you fear that some of your son's behaviors around gaming are somewhat addictive. I guess I would say a few things about that. It's worth thinking about whether he thinks that it's a problem. It may be that it's not a problem, that he enjoys it. It's a way of letting off steam. If it's not harming his life in other ways, I'd be curious whether his kids feel that he pays them attention. If he feels the kids feel they're being neglected for these games, or his wife feels he's been neglected, or his work was saying, look, your work's not good, those would be alarm bells for me. But it's possible that it's just healthy letting off steam. I watch dumb soap operas. I love a British show called Coronation Street that I know airs in Canada, right? It's not, can I justify watching Coronation Street? No, it's not. I'm not doing anything that's greatly enriching my life, but it just is a way for me to unwind, whatever it is, 2 hours a week. So
the value of escapism in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. So it may be healthy escapism, or it may be unhealthy escapism. And I think it's worth you thinking about. It sounds to me like you feel quite guilty, and I don't think you should feel guilty. You were talking about, you were a struggling single mom. You worked really hard to provide for your children. And I think what may be happening here, I'm not sure, I could be completely wrong, but instinctively what I feel is that you're feeling guilty, and you're looking at his behavior and thinking, well, this is the product of something I got wrong. And you were saying, if I could go back. And, you did the best you could in the circumstances you found yourself. And it sounds like you worked really hard for yourself and your son, and you should have been given more support and help, but you weren't. So you did everything you could. And, it's not the worst thing in the world that he played Donkey Kong. We all did. So I don't think you should feel tortured and guilty about that. So it's possible that you're projecting your own feelings of, I think, undeserved guilt onto his escapist behavior. So I think I would try to explore with him Does he think it's a problem? Does anyone else in his life think it's a problem? If they don't, then it probably isn't a problem. If they do, then I think it'd be about exploring, well, what other ways could he express those feelings? What other ways, what other things could he do in his life that would help him with that? I wrote a book called Lost Connections that's partly about that. So yeah, that's my sort of general feeling, but it's a very complex and actually very moving question. And again, it reminds me of Ruben. There's so much love for your son in that question that in itself is something to be proud of.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, Johann, but I wanted to sort of end on your thoughts. You've mentioned there's sort of that bigger societal push needed. Can you expand on what you mean by that in our last couple of minutes here?
Yeah. This isn't happening because, Joan or Ruben or Gay or any of the people who phoned in somehow lacked willpower, right? This happened to all of us because of really big changes that none of us chose. But we don't have to accept this, right? We can challenge this, just like we were saying before about lead. We didn't accept that. We ultimately refused to accept the presence of lead petrol and lead paint in our societies because they were harming our brains. We can refuse to accept the specific elements within the tech and the elements within our food and the elements within the way our schools and workplaces work that are harming our attention. We can challenge these things, but it requires a shift in psychology. We need to stop blaming ourselves, right? You need to stop thinking there's something wrong with you. We absolutely need to change what we can. And I go through dozens of things in my book, Stolen Focus, that we can change. But we also need to realize we shouldn't only be asking for these small personal tweaks. We are not medieval peasants living at the court of King Zuckerberg, begging for a few little crumbs of attention from his table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds. And we do not have to tolerate this being done to us and our children, but it requires us to say, no, you don't get to do that to me. No, you don't get to do that to my brain. No, you don't get to do that to my child. And in some instances, protecting ourselves and our children in an individual level, but we've also got to be pressuring our governments. Ultimately, we couldn't ban leaded petrol. You couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. We had to do it collectively through our governments. And some of these things, not all, but some of these things will have to be dealt with at a governmental level. And governments are only as good as the pressure we put on them, right? The writer Rebecca Solnit said, politicians are weather vanes. It's our job to be the weather, right? So we need to make this an issue. Everyone is, I doubt there's a parent listening who didn't hear Ruben and feels some level of his anxiety. We can all see this happening. So we've got to both protect our kids and exert this pressure on our governments to really act on this.
It is such a relatable conversation for so many folks, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Johann. I really appreciate all this time and taking these calls with us.
Oh, well, you asked great questions, Josh, and I'm really grateful to all the people who phoned in. I was really moved by those questions, so thanks, everyone.
It's Johann Hari. He's the author of Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And thank you so much to everyone who took the time to call, email, and listen today on the show. On tomorrow's show, we're talking about AI and higher learning. That's on tomorrow's Alberta at Noon. We'll talk again soon.